I never expected my life to take such a dramatic turn over something as simple as a hammock. But that's exactly what happened during my second year of college, when the boundaries between friendship and something more began to blur in the most unexpected way. I'm Alex, a 21-year-old English literature major with a minor in creative writing. I've always been the introspective type, the kind of person who prefers curling up with a good book rather than hitting the clubs on a Friday night. My coming out story was relatively uneventful. I told my parents I was gay during my senior year of high school, and while there was an adjustment period, they eventually came around. College life suited me well. I found my people, joined the campus LGBTQ+ alliance, and generally felt comfortable in my own skin. When it came time to find off-campus housing for my second year, I was introduced to Jamie through a mutual friend. Jamie was studying engineering, played on the university soccer team, and had a reputation for being easygoing and reliable. We weren't exactly friends before, more like acquaintances who occasionally crossed paths at campus events. Jamie was straight, very straight, if his dating history was anything to go by, but we got along well enough during our initial meeting that sharing an apartment seemed like a practical arrangement. Our apartment was nothing special from the outside, a standard 2-bedroom unit in a complex about 15 minutes from campus. But inside, we'd managed to create a space that felt like home. The living room featured a worn but comfortable sectional sofa facing a modest TV, with bookshelves lining one wall, mostly filled with my collection, though Jamie had contributed a surprising number of sci-fi novels. The kitchen was small but functional, with a breakfast bar that separated it from the main living area. We'd established an unspoken rule about keeping common areas tidy, and for the most part, we respected each other's space. The real gem of our apartment, at least in my opinion, was the balcony. It wasn't particularly large, but it offered a decent view of the small wooded area behind our building. I'd installed a hammock out there during our first week, a beautiful hand-woven piece in shades of blue and green that my aunt had brought back from her travels in Central America. The hammock was my sanctuary, my personal retreat. I would spend hours there reading, writing in my journal, or simply watching the play of sunlight through the trees. Jamie respected that this was my spot, and though he would occasionally join me on the balcony, sitting in one of the folding chairs we kept out there, he had never shown any interest in the hammock itself. Let me paint a picture of Jamie for you. He stood about 6 feet tall with the kind of athletic build you'd expect from someone who'd played soccer most of his life. His hair was a sandy blonde that lightened in the summer months, and he had these expressive hazel eyes that seemed to change color depending on what he wore. His smile was infectious, the kind that made you want to smile back even on your worst days. Despite being undeniably attractive, Jamie never seemed aware of the effect he had on people. He was humble about his achievements and genuinely kind to everyone he met. Our dynamic as roommates was comfortable from the start. We established routines that allowed us to share the space without stepping on each other's toes. Jamie was an early riser who would often be out the door for morning practice before I even woke up. I tended to stay up later, especially when I was working on writing projects. We'd usually cross paths in the evenings, sometimes cooking dinner together or watching a show before retreating to our respective rooms. It was easy, uncomplicated, exactly what you'd want in a roommate situation. The day everything changed started like any other. It was a Sunday in early October, with that perfect fall weather that makes you want to spend every possible moment outdoors. I had been in my hammock since mid-morning, alternating between reading a novel for my contemporary literature class and simply enjoying the gentle sway and the crisp autumn air. I had my earbuds in, lost in the world of my book and the indie folk playlist that served as its soundtrack. I didn't hear Jamie return from his morning run. I only became aware of his presence when I felt the hammock suddenly dip and sway. Startled, I pulled out my earbuds and looked up to find Jamie climbing into the hammock with me. Now, this wasn't a large hammock. It was designed for one person, maybe two if they were very comfortable with each other. And here was Jamie, all 6 feet of him, trying to settle in beside me as if this was something we did every day. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended as I tried to steady the now wildly swinging hammock. Jamie just grinned, that easy smile that somehow made it impossible to be truly annoyed with him. "It looked comfortable," he said, still adjusting his position. "And I've never been in a hammock before." "There's barely enough room for one person," I pointed out, though I was already shifting to accommodate him. our bodies pressed together from shoulder to ankle in the confines of the woven fabric. Balance needs bodies, Jamie replied cryptically, finally finding a position that stopped the hammock from threatening to dump us both onto the balcony floor. It's physics. Two bodies distribute the weight more evenly. I wanted to argue that this wasn't how physics worked, but I was suddenly very aware of the warmth of his body against mine, the faint scent of his body wash mingling with the earthy smell that clung to him after his run. So instead, I just shook my head and tried to focus back on my book, though the words seemed to blur before my eyes. "What are you reading?" Jamie asked, his breath warm against my ear as he peered over my shoulder. And just like that, we spent the next 2 hours in the hammock together, talking about books, classes, and eventually sharing stories from our childhoods. When we finally extracted ourselves, a process that involved much more physical contact and laughter than I was prepared for, something had shifted between us. I just wasn't sure what it meant. The days following the hammock incident, as I referred to it in my mind, carried a strange new tension. Not an unpleasant tension, necessarily, but a heightened awareness that made every interaction feel significant. I found myself noticing things about Jamie I'd previously overlooked. The way he absently ran his fingers through his hair when he was concentrating, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the careful way he listened when I was speaking, as if my words actually mattered. What made it all the more confusing was that Jamie seemed to be seeking out my company more than before. He'd ask if I wanted to watch a movie together instead of retreating to his room to game with his online friends. He'd linger in the kitchen while I cooked, offering to help chop vegetables or simply keeping me company. And most notably, he'd join me on the balcony more frequently, sometimes bringing his textbooks to study while I read. The hammock became a recurring theme. Jamie would casually ask if I minded sharing it, always with that same justification: "Balance needs bodies," said with a smile that suggested it was becoming our private joke. And each time, I would make a show of reluctance before making room for him, all while my heart raced at the prospect of that close proximity. I tried to remind myself that Jamie was straight, that this newfound closeness was just friendship developing between roommates, that reading anything more into it would only lead to disappointment and awkwardness. But there were moments, fleeting instances when our eyes would meet a beat too long, or when his hand would rest against mine in the hammock, that made me wonder if I was missing something. About 3 weeks after the first hammock incident, we had a movie night that stretched late into the evening. We'd been watching a sci-fi series Jamie loved, and I was surprised to find myself genuinely invested in the story. When the final episode ended, neither of us made a move to get up from the couch, where we'd been sitting side by side, shoulders touching. "Thanks for watching this with me," Jamie said, turning slightly to face me. "None of my other friends have the patience for it." "It's actually good," I admitted, though I still think the premise is scientifically questionable at best. Jamie laughed, and in the dim light of the living room, with only the TV's blue glow illuminating his features, something vulnerable crossed his expression. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, his voice quieter than usual. My heart immediately kicked into a higher gear. "Sure," I managed to say, trying to sound casual. "When did you know you were gay?" he asked, and then quickly added, "Sorry if that's too personal. You don't have to answer." I'd been asked this question enough times that I had a standard response, but something about the way Jamie was looking at me made me want to give him the real answer, not the sanitized version I offered to acquaintances. "I think I always knew I was different," I started slowly, "but I put a name to it when I was 14. There was this boy in my English class who used to wear band t-shirts and had this way of arguing with our teacher that made everyone laugh. I couldn't stop thinking about him. That's when I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just admiration or wanting to be friends." Jamie nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Were you scared when you realized?" "Terrified," I admitted, but also relieved in a way. Having a word for it meant I wasn't just broken or wrong. I was something that existed in the world, something other people were too. Jamie was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I've never really questioned my sexuality," he finally said. "It was always just assumed. By everyone, including me." There was something in his tone that made my breath catch. "But," I prompted gently. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made the room seem to shrink around us. "But lately I've been wondering if maybe attraction isn't as straightforward as I thought." My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. What do you mean? I asked, afraid to assume anything, afraid to hope. Jamie ran a hand through his hair. That gesture I'd come to find so endearing. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, I've always connected with people based on who they are, not what they are. But I never thought about what that meant until. He trailed off, but his eyes never left mine. And in that moment, I understood what he couldn't quite say. Until us, sitting together in a hammock, bodies pressed close for the sake of balance. That's actually not uncommon, I said carefully. Some people experience attraction based primarily on emotional connection rather than gender. It's called demisexuality, though it exists on a spectrum, and labels aren't always necessary. Jamie seemed to consider this. I've never felt this confused before, he admitted. And I don't want to make things weird between us if I'm just, I don't know, going through some phase or something. Hey, I said, gathering my courage to place my hand over his. Figuring yourself out isn't weird. And whatever you discover, it doesn't have to change anything you don't want it to change. The smile he gave me then was small but genuine. Thanks, he said, turning his hand to briefly squeeze mine before pulling away. I should probably get some sleep. Early practice tomorrow. As he stood to leave, I called after him. Jamie? For what it's worth, questioning is brave. Not everyone has the courage to examine what they've always taken for granted. He paused at the hallway entrance, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Good night, Alex, he said softly, and then he was gone, leaving me alone with a heart full of confusion and a spark of something that felt dangerously like hope. The following days were a delicate dance of meaningful glances and careful conversations. Neither of us directly referenced our late-night talk, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. Jamie seemed to be processing, working through his thoughts, and I was determined to give him the space to do so without pressure. That didn't stop my mind from racing with possibilities, though. Every time our hands brushed while doing dishes, every laugh we shared over inside jokes, every moment in the hammock, which had become a regular occurrence. All of it felt charged with potential energy, like the air before a thunderstorm. About a week after our conversation, Jamie invited me to come watch one of his soccer games. I'd attended a few before, usually with groups of other friends, but this felt different, more intentional. I sat in the stands, watching him move across the field with athletic grace, and allowed myself to fully acknowledge the depth of my feelings for him. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was admiration for his kindness, his intelligence, his quiet confidence. It was appreciation for the way he made me feel seen and valued. It was, I realized with a mixture of exhilaration and terror, something very close to love. After the game, which his team won, thanks in part to Jamie's assist on the winning goal, he jogged over to where I was waiting. His face was flushed from exertion, hair damp with sweat, but his smile, when he saw me, was radiant. You came, he said, as if he'd been afraid I wouldn't. Of course, I replied. I wouldn't miss it. There was a moment of awkwardness. Did we hug? High five. Before Jamie said, give me 15 minutes to shower and change. Then maybe we could grab dinner? We ended up at a small Thai restaurant near campus, tucked into a corner booth where the lighting was dim and the background music low enough for conversation. Jamie seemed nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and starting sentences only to abandon them midway. Finally, after our food arrived, he took a deep breath and said, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what we talked about the other night. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the way my pulse quickened. And I think. He paused, searching for words. I think I've been so focused on fitting into the boxes other people created for me that I never stopped to question if they actually fit. Football player. Engineering student. Straight guy? It was easier to just accept those labels than to ask myself what I really wanted. What do you want, Jamie? I asked softly. His eyes met mine across the table, vulnerable yet determined. Right now, I want to see where this goes. With us. If that's something you'd be open to. The hope I'd been trying to temper suddenly bloomed full force in my chest. I'd like that, I said, unable to keep the smile from spreading across my face. But I need to know this isn't just experimentation for you. I'm not looking to be someone's test run. Jamie shook his head firmly. That's not what this is. I can't promise I have everything figured out, but I know how I feel when I'm with you. That's real, regardless of what label ends up making sense for me. We spent the rest of dinner talking about boundaries and expectations, about the complexities of Jamie's journey and the potential challenges we might face. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had at the start of a relationship, if that's what this was becoming. And despite the uncertainties, I felt a profound sense of rightness about it all. When we returned to the apartment, there was a new shyness between us, the awareness of having crossed a threshold from which there was no easy return. We stood in the living room, the familiar space suddenly feeling charged with new possibility. "It's still nice out," Jamie said after a moment. "Want to sit on the balcony for a bit?" I nodded, and without discussion, we both headed for the hammock. This time, as we settled in together, our bodies aligned with practiced ease. There was an intentionality to the way Jamie's arm came around my shoulders, to the way I allowed my head to rest against his chest. "Balance needs bodies," he murmured, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Is that really why you climbed in here with me that first time?" I asked, tilting my head to look up at him. "For physics," Jamie laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest against my ear. "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly I just wanted to be close to you. I didn't know why yet, but I knew I wanted that." The weeks that followed were a gradual exploration, both of our relationship and of Jamie's understanding of himself. We moved slowly, allowing physical intimacy to develop naturally alongside the emotional connection that had been building for months. Our first kiss happened in the hammock, appropriately enough. A gentle, questioning press of lips that quickly deepened into something that left us both breathless and laughing as the hammock swayed precariously beneath us. Jamie didn't rush to adopt a new label for himself, and I didn't push him to. "I'm still figuring it out," he would say when the topic arose. "But I know how I feel about you, and that's what matters most to me right now." There were challenges, of course. Jamie had to navigate coming out to his teammates and friends as someone who was dating a man, even if he wasn't ready to define his sexuality more specifically. Some were immediately supportive. Others needed time to adjust their perception of him, and a few reacted with the kind of ignorance we'd both anticipated. Through it all, Jamie showed a resilience that only deepened my admiration for him. My friends from the LGBTQ+ alliance had questions too, some concerned that I was setting myself up for heartbreak by dating someone still exploring their sexuality. But they came around as they saw the genuine care and respect in our relationship, the way we communicated openly about our fears and hopes. 6 months into our relationship, we were lying in the hammock on a warm spring evening, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The hammock had become a symbol for us, the place where our story began, where we'd shared countless conversations, where we'd first kissed. It had witnessed our journey from roommates to friends to something much more meaningful. "I've been thinking," Jamie said, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm, "about what you said when we first started dating, about balance." "What about it?" I asked, content and curious. "You were right. Balance isn't just about physics. It's about finding the right person to balance you. Someone who challenges you and supports you in equal measure." He shifted slightly to look into my eyes. "You're that person for me, Alex. You helped me find a balance I didn't even know I was missing." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring air. "And here I thought you just wanted to steal my hammock." Jamie laughed, pulling me closer. "Well, that too. But mostly I wanted you." As we lay there, perfectly balanced in our shared space, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led us here. How a simple hammock and a playful justification, "balance needs bodies," had opened the door to something neither of us had been looking for, but both of us needed. Love, I've learned, often arrives in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes it's a straight roommate climbing into your hammock. Sometimes it's the courage to question what you've always believed about yourself. Sometimes it's finding balance together when the world feels off-kilter. Our story continues to unfold, day by day, moment by moment. We don't know exactly where it will lead, but we're discovering the path together, finding our balance as we go. And that, the journey itself, with all its uncertainties and revelations, is perhaps the most beautiful part of all. Looking back now, I can't help but smile at how a simple piece of woven fabric strung between 2 points created the perfect metaphor for our relationship. A hammock only works when there's tension on both sides, when the weight is distributed just right. Too much pressure in one direction, and the whole thing falls apart. But find that sweet spot, that perfect balance, And you create something that can hold you safely above the ground, something that can sway with the breeze without breaking. Balance needs bodies, yes. But more than that, hearts need balance. The balance of understanding and mystery, of similarity and difference, of independence and togetherness. Jamie and I are still learning this dance, still finding our way. But every day, as we navigate this unexpected love we've found, I'm grateful for that October afternoon when my straight roommate climbed into my hammock and changed everything. Total _char_count, 18,767.